Imagine you're going to the pharmacy, right? You're picking up a prescription for a leaky bladder.
Okay, pretty standard.
Yeah, but then the pharmacist hands you a bottle of pills that are actually FDA approved for major depressive disorder.
You'd probably think there was a massive mix-up behind the counter.
Exactly. I mean, treating a physical, mechanical, plumbing problem with a medication that's designed to alter brain chemistry, it just sounds completely counterintuitive.
It sounds like a mistake waiting for a malpractice suit, honestly. I mean, usually when we think about treating stress urinary incontinence, which is the clinical term for that leaky bladder issue we're talking about, we assume the fix has to be mechanical.
Right, like physical fixes.
Yeah, you do pelvic floor exercises or, you undergo surgery to place a mesh sling to physically prop up the urethra. Taking an antidepressant like duloxetine for this, it feels like bringing a psychology textbook to a plumbing emergency.
It really does.
Yeah.
And yet, looking through this stack of pharmacology papers,
Yeah.
urodynamic studies, and neurophysiology research we've gathered for you today, this isn't a mix-up at all.
No, not at all.
It's not even a happy accident or some, random side effect. It is a highly targeted, incredibly elegant neurological hack. So for all of you listening, our fellow learners who love getting to the core of these complex topics without drowning in jargon, our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how duloxetine physically rewires the body's hardware to stop stress urinary incontinence.
And to understand how a depression drug fixes a physical leak, we actually have to completely rethink how the bladder operates on a baseline level. We tend to view the bladder as this, simple balloon that just passively fills up with water and then empties out.
Right, it's a storage bag.
But it's so much more dynamic than that. The lower urinary tract operates on a really highly coordinated two-phase system. You have the storage phase and the voiding phase. And those two phases rely on two entirely different types of muscle acting in direct opposition to one another. So first, you have the wall of the bladder itself, which is made of a type of smooth muscle. It's called the detrusor.
Smooth muscle meaning it operates involuntarily, right? Like we don't have to consciously think about relaxing our stomach or our intestines, and we don't have to consciously tell the detrusor muscle to relax while the bladder is filling.
Exactly. I mean, the autonomic nervous system just handles that for us in the background. During the storage phase, the detrusor muscle has to stay completely relaxed so the bladder can expand and accommodate the urine without increasing the pressure inside. It's the reservoir.
Makes sense.
But at the bottom of that reservoir, you have the external urethral sphincter, or EUS.
This is the exit door.
Yes, and this muscle is fundamentally different. It's striated muscle, so it's much closer in structure to the skeletal muscles in your biceps or your quads.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and its job during the storage phase is the exact opposite of the detrusor. It has to stay constantly actively contracted to keep the exit closed.
So if the detrusor is the calm, passive reservoir, the external sphincter is basically the dam holding the water back.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And under normal everyday conditions, the dam is strong enough to hold back the baseline pressure of the fluid. But stress urinary incontinence isn't about baseline conditions, is it?
Not at all. SUI is entirely about sudden, violent spikes in abdominal pressure.
Like when you sneeze?
Sneeze, cough, laugh, or even lifting a heavy box. That physical stress pushes down on the entire abdominal cavity, and that includes the bladder.
Right.
If the resistance of that sphincter, the dam, isn't strong enough to withstand that sudden spike in pressure, the dam gets breached. The water spills over.
But a dam doesn't just spontaneously decide to reinforce itself when a storm rolls in. I mean, it needs a weather report, right?
Yes,
It needs orders from a control room.
exactly.
In the human body, the sphincter doesn't act independently. It takes direct orders from a nerve. And the medical literature points out that this external sphincter is heavily innervated by something called the pudendal nerve.
The pudendal nerve is essentially the communication wire sending the electrical signal to the muscle fibers of the dam, telling them to clench tightly. When a flash flood hits like a sneeze, the pudendal nerve is supposed to instantly signal the dam to reinforce itself.
Okay, so if the pudendal nerve is just the wire, we have to trace that wire back to see who is actually sitting at the control panel giving the orders. Where does this nerve even originate?
So we have to travel out of the pelvis and all the way up to the base of the spine, specifically to the sacral spinal cord.
Okay.
And nestled right in the ventral horn of the spinal cord is a tiny, very specific cluster of cells known as Onuf's nucleus.
Onuf's nucleus. That sounds like a sci-fi command center or something.
It basically is. It is densely packed with motor neurons that feed directly into the pudendal nerve. The central nervous system uses Onuf's nucleus as an air traffic control tower for the entire urination process.
But an air traffic controller needs, like, a radio frequency to actually transmit messages to the planes, right?
Right, and in the nervous system, those radio signals are neurotransmitters.
And reading through these neurophysiology papers, I was genuinely surprised by what the primary signal is here. I assumed it would be some obscure chemical, but it's actually glutamate.
Yeah, glutamate is the workhorse of the central nervous system. When the brain wants to keep the sphincter closed during the storage phase, the absolute main neurotransmitter it relies on is glutamate. It gets released right there at the synaptic clefts in Onuf's nucleus.
So it binds to the motor neurons, activating the pudendal nerve.
Exactly.
And then that nerve sends an electrical impulse all the way down to the sphincter muscle in the pelvis, releasing a different chemical called acetylcholine, which causes the actual physical contraction of the muscle fibers. So basically, glutamate is the master switch. It turns the system on.
It is the ultimate initiator of motor activity in this specific pathway. Without glutamate, you do not get that baseline contraction of the sphincter.
Wait a second, though. If glutamate is the master switch that makes the muscle contract and prevents the leaks, why are all of these medical papers focused on duloxetine?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, duloxetine doesn't do anything to glutamate. We established earlier that it's an SNRI, a serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. If the goal is to keep the dam closed, and glutamate closes the dam, why aren't doctors just prescribing a pill that gives patients a massive boost of glutamate?
That is a really logical leap, but it hits a major biological roadblock. You cannot just flood the human body with glutamate. Like I mentioned, glutamate is the workhorse excitatory neurotransmitter, and it's used absolutely everywhere in your brain and spinal cord.
Oh, everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. It's responsible for learning, memory, general cognition, and almost every sensory pathway you have.
So a systemic glutamate pill wouldn't just target the bladder.
Oh, it would target everything. If you gave someone a massive dose of glutamate to fix their bladder, you would cause widespread systemic chaos. We're talking severe neurotoxicity, massive seizures, potential brain damage.
Wow. Okay, so that's a wildly blunt instrument.
Exactly. We cannot mess with the main power switch directly.
So we have to find a back door. If we can't touch the on and off switch, we need to find a way to adjust the volume dials that control how sensitive that switch is.
Yes.
And looking closely at Onuf's nucleus, those volume dials are serotonin and norepinephrine.
And this is where duloxetine enters the picture and performs this modulatory magic. As an SNRI, its primary job is to block the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine.
Let's break down reuptake for a second for everyone. Normally, when a nerve releases a chemical like serotonin into the tiny gap between cells, the synapse, it does its job, and then the body quickly vacuums it back up to keep the space clean, right?
Or recycles it.
So duloxetine essentially unplugs the vacuum cleaner.
It blocks the transporter proteins responsible for that cleanup in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Leaving more of those feel-good chemicals floating in the synapse helps treat major depressive disorder. But for stress urinary incontinence, we don't care about the brain at all.
Right, because the crucial action is happening way down in the sacrospinal cord.
Exactly. Duloxetine causes a localized buildup of serotonin and norepinephrine right at Onuf's nucleus.
But the sources are incredibly specific on one vital detail here. Serotonin and norepinephrine cannot induce a sphincter contraction on their own if glutamate isn't present.
No, that's not.
They don't flip the switch. They are strictly modulatory. They potentiate or, they enhance the effects of whatever glutamate is already doing.
They don't initiate the action. They merely amplify it.
Let's try to visualize this. If glutamate is the engine of a car, providing the actual driving force to move forward,
then serotonin and norepinephrine are the turbochargers bolted onto that engine.
yes, duloxetine doesn't start the engine. You don't even need a key for the drug to work. What it does is keep the turbocharger spooled up and running at absolute maximum capacity.
That's a great analogy.
So when your body finally does step on the gas pedal and releases glutamate, the engine has a massive explosive amount of extra power.
Exactly. Duloxetine is pulling up the turbo pressure in the spinal cord, just waiting for the glutamate engine to rev. But to really grasp what turbocharging looks like to a single microscopic nerve cell, we have to zoom in all the way to the cellular level.
We really need to look at the biophysics. When we talk about how these neurotransmitters physically change the environment of the cell, we're looking at the specific receptors they bind to on the surface of these motor neurons in Onuf's nucleus.
Right.
For serotonin, the pharmacology papers highlight two key receptor subtypes, 5-HT2A and 5-HT2C.
And when the pulled up serotonin binds to those specific receptors, it increases the overall resting tone of the urethra. It just tightens the baseline security, basically.
And for norepinephrine, it's targeting something called alpha-1 adrenoceptors, which is a fascinating evolutionary quirk because the sources mentioned that if norepinephrine binds to a different receptor nearby, the alpha-2 receptor, it actually inhibits the reflex and relaxes the muscle.
Yeah, the body has these built-in push-pull mechanisms, just a constant tug of war. But duloxetine's clinical effect leans heavily on activating that facilitatory alpha-1 pathway.
And to see the sheer power of activating those alpha-1 receptors, we have to look at one of the most incredible pieces of research in this stack. It's a cellular study using patch-clamped recordings on spinal cord slices from neonatal rats.
Oh, the patch clamp study,
For
yes.
anyone who hasn't spent time in a neurobiology lab, this is just a mind-blowing technique. They take a microscopic glass pipette, they attach it with a tight seal to a single individual cell membrane, and literally measure the tiny electrical currents passing through the ion channels of that one cell.
It's amazing. It allows researchers to watch the electrical behavior of the cell in real time. And what they found when they bathed these specific urethral sphincter motor neurons in noradrenaline, which is basically the equivalent of norepinephrine, was dramatic.
What a half.
The noradrenaline made the neurons highly, highly excitable.
The sources describe a cascade of specific biophysical changes here. Let's translate them for you. First, the noradrenaline depolarizes the neurons. Normally, a resting cell has a negative electrical charge inside compared to the outside.
Right.
Depolarizing it means making the inside more positive, bringing it dangerously close to the threshold where the nerve will actually fire an electrical signal.
It pushes the cell right to the edge of the cliff. Second, the patch clamp showed that it increases the cell's input resistance.
Input resistance. Okay, how should we think about that?
Think of a cell membrane like a bucket holding water. Usually the bucket has a few tiny leaks. Electrical current constantly seeps out, noradrenaline plugs those leaks.
Oh, I see. So if the cell is less leaky, any electrical signal that comes in from the outside gets trapped inside. It builds up pressure much faster and has a much stronger impact.
Exactly, which naturally leads to the third major change. It reduces the neuron's rheobase.
Rheobase. That's essentially the minimum amount of electrical stimulus required to make the nerve actually fire an action potential.
All right. Correct. By lowering the rheobase, noradrenaline turns the neuron into a hair trigger. It takes a tiny fraction of the normal electrical poke to get a massive reaction out of this nerve.
Wow.
But the patch clamp study didn't stop there. It showed a fourth change. Noradrenaline significantly reduces something called after hyperpolarization.
Yeah, and after hyperpolarization. Okay, let's break that down. After a nerve fires an electrical signal, it exhausts itself. It dips into a deep negative electrical state for just a millisecond to recharge its batteries before it can fire again.
Right.
That recharge period is the after hyperpolarization.
And if you reduce that phase, you dramatically shorten the reset time. The nerve doesn't need to rest as long.
Sure, you're essentially turning a single-shot bolt-action rifle into an automatic machine gun. The neurons can fire action potentials incredibly fast.
That is exactly what happens. You have a nerve cell sitting at the edge of the cliff with plugged leaks, a hair trigger, and the ability to fire at machine gun speeds.
Okay, wait. If I'm listening to this is the exact moment where I start getting worried. Well, we are using duloxetine to flood this area with serotonin and norepinephrine. We are making these nerves hyperexcitable, lowering their firing threshold, and turning them into rapid-fire machines that clench the sphincter shut.
Yes.
Doesn't that mean the sphincter is just permanently locked down? Like, how does a patient taking this drug ever actually go to the bathroom?
That is the million-dollar question, and it brings us all the way back to why we spent so much time discussing glutamate as the master switch.
Ah, right.
This hyperexcitability we just described, it is not a permanent static spasm. The drug isn't forcing the muscle to contract on its own. It is intricately, beautifully tied to an involuntary physical reaction called the guarding reflex.
The guarding reflex. Okay, this takes us back to the dam and the flash flood.
Exactly. Under normal, quiet conditions, your bladder is just slowly filling. You have a low baseline level of glutamate being released to keep the sphincter closed.
And the serotonin and norepinephrine are pooling there, keeping the motor neurons primed, but there's no major event happening. The engine is just idling.
Right, but then you sneeze.
The sneeze changes everything.
Suddenly, there is a massive spike in abdominal pressure pushing down on the bladder. Your body's sensory nerves detect this mechanical stress instantly.
In a fraction of a second.
In a fraction of a second, the central nervous system realizes the dam is about to break, so it sends a massive surge of glutamate down to onophus nucleus to trigger the guarding reflex.
Which is a sharp, sudden, violent contraction of the sphincter to guard against a leak.
Yes. And this is where the patient taking duloxetine has a totally different experience than someone who isn't. Because of the medication, their synaptic clefts are already flooded with serotonin and norepinephrine. The turbochargers are fully spooled up.
So when that sneeze happens and that surge of glutamate hits the motor neuron, it doesn't just trigger a normal baseline reaction.
No, it hits a neuron that is depolarized, highly resistant to signal loss, and ready to fire at maximum speed. The serotonin and norepinephrine dramatically amplify the glutamate signal.
The physical result of this is just staggering. Looking at the animal studies in our sources, when they stimulated these specific neural pathways, duloxetine caused an 8-fold increase in the electromyographic activity of the sphincter muscle during the storage phase.
An 8-fold increase.
An 8-fold increase in electrical firing. I mean, it clamps that muscle shut with incredible force exactly in the millisecond when it needs it most.
It perfectly ramps up the guarding reflex to match the physical stress of the sneeze or the cough. But you asked how a patient actually urinates. What happens when the person goes to the bathroom voluntarily?
Right, because the maturation cycle shifts from the storage phase to the voiding phase.
And the very first physiological step of the voiding phase is that the central nervous system completely shuts off the release of glutamate to onophus nucleus. The master switch is flipped off.
Oh, I see. Because the glutamate is completely gone, the turbochargers have absolutely nothing to amplify. It doesn't matter how much serotonin or norepinephrine is floating around in the synapse because of the duloxetine. Without the glutamate engine running, the car isn't moving.
The motor neurons instantly quiet down. The pudendal nerve stops firing, the external sphincter relaxes completely, the exit door opens, and the detrusor muscle in the bladder wall can finally contract to push the fluid out. Normal urination occurs without any interference from the drug.
That is so elegant. The brilliance of using an SNRI like duloxetine for stress urinary incontinence isn't that it creates some new artificial function in the pelvis. It acts as a smart amplifier for a natural reflex.
It intervenes dynamically only when the body is under physical stress and gets completely out of the way when the body needs to function normally.
It really is a phenomenal example of pharmacological elegance. It leverages the body's existing circuitry. It just turns up the volume on a protective reflex without ever disrupting the underlying primary mechanism. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took, because the distance from point A to point B is wild. We started with a drug originally developed and prescribed for treating major depressive disorder. It works by blocking the cleanup of two major neurotransmitters, serotonin and norepinephrine.
Right.
And while we usually think of this chemical pooling happening in the brain to alter our mood, it's also happening way down in the lower spine, specifically at a cluster of nerves called onophus nucleus.
And this localized flooding of neurotransmitters in the sacral spine supercharges the motor neurons. It plugs their electrical leaks, lowers their firing threshold, and allows them to fire much faster.
But they only fire when the central nervous system sends the glutamate signal. So when a laugh, a cough, or a sneeze threatens a leak, the body sends that glutamate signal to trigger the guarding reflex. Thanks to the duloxetine, that signal hits supercharged nerves, sending a massively strengthened electrical impulse down the pudendal nerve and dramatically clamping the external sphincter shut right in the nick of time.
But when it's time to actually use the restroom, the glutamate stops, the superchargers spin down into silence, and normal bodily function resumes.
It's amazing. We are essentially taking the neurochemistry of human emotion and applying it to mechanical physics.
Which brings up a really profound implication if we step back and look at the entire human system.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the two specific neurotransmitters we just spent all this time discussing. Serotonin and norepinephrine, these are monoamines. Up in the brain, these are the exact same chemicals that dictate our mood, our anxiety levels, our emotional regulation, and even how our brain perceives chronic pain.
Right. That's why duloxetine is prescribed for depression, anxiety, and even diabetic nerve pain. It alters how we feel.
But simultaneously, as we just learned from these cellular studies, these very same mood-altering chemicals are being used in the lower spinal cord to control the physical and mechanical tone of a urinary sphincter. They are the volume dials on a very basic physical plumbing reflex.
So the neurochemistry of our highest, most complex emotional states, is absolutely identical to the neurochemistry of our lowest, most basic bodily functions.
It begs a fascinating question. We spend so much time in medicine separating the physical from the psychological. But if our emotional neurochemistry and our basic bodily reflexes share the exact same chemical language, how many of our other physical mechanical ailments out there might not actually be structural problems at all?
Hmm?
How many of them might just be an issue of chemical translation waiting to be discovered?
Wow. If an antidepressant can fix a leaky bladder just by turning up the volume on a single nerve in the spine, what other mechanical issues in medicine are we completely misinterpreting? It really makes you look at the human body and the medicine cabinet in a completely different light. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning those hidden connections, and we'll see you next time.